So, I have a very fun and very fruitful practice for you to work on for this coming week. Now, last week, we talked so much about building your vision around food. So, the last two episodes, if you haven't listened to the last two episodes, definitely do that because one of the main themes was where your attention goes, your energy flows. So, at this point of your evolution, it's really important to focus your attention on what it is that you want to create rather than the things you're trying to push away. Because the more we try to push something away, the more we try to resist something or run away from it, the more attention, the more energy we're actually giving that thing. So if I constantly tell myself, don't binge, don't binge, don't binge, what is my brain repeating? Binge, 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 binge. It becomes the top of my consciousness. I'm starting to train my brain to obsess about that, to think about that all the time. So when we're building a new relationship with food, we get to a point where we don't want to focus on the things that we're trying to push away. And even just look at what my hands are doing. If you're watching this on video, or if not, just imagine you're trying to push something away from you, like push a wall away from you or something. In order to do that, you literally have to attach your hand to that thing that you're pushing away. So the more we try to push away, the more we actually become attached. So, what do we want to focus our attention on? Where your attention goes, your energy flows. So, the last two episodes were all about building your vision for yourself of what relationship with food you actually want to create. And to get clarity on that, I sent my email list a challenge to force your brain to simplify. So, if you had to narrow it down to just one word to describe how you want your relationship with food to be or feel, what word would that be? Just one word. Now, this word then becomes your North Star. And you start to align all of your actions, thoughts, behaviors to follow this North Star. And this is like your compass. Whenever you get lost, whenever you get distracted, you remember what's my North Star? And you have a very clear, simple one word that starts to dictate your actions that follow. Make sense? And then I asked those of you who are on my email list to write back to me and tell me, what is your one word? What is your North Star? And a whole bunch of you wrote back. And believe it or not, I do read every email. I don't respond to all of them, obviously, but I do read them and I send you love to wherever you are. So, what I did was I made notes of what the most common North Stars are that you guys wrote. And what I'm going to do in this episode is I'm going to take some of those as examples and I'm going to give you an exercise to practice this week all throughout the week. And you'll get to watch what happens. Okay, ready? So, first, I'll share the top 5 words that came up. Okay, number 1 was peace. Number 2, freedom. And then third, fourth, fifth place were abundance, joy, and nourishment. So we've got peace, freedom, abundance, joy, nourishment. Now I'm going to explain the exercise. Now, if you're just listening for the first time, you don't have to decide on your North Star word yet. Listen to the rest of the episode. Let me explain the exercise, and maybe as I do, your North Star will become more and more clear. All right. Now, for this exercise to work, I don't want you to limit your lens to just food. Okay. So if your word is peace, for example, and you want to experience more peace with food, but what your current life looks like is you run around all day like your head's cut off, running from place to place, constantly feeling busy, constantly feeling behind. In my eyes, it's a very unrealistic thing to then think you're going to sit down with food, which is one of your most triggering parts of your day, and then automatically feel peace. It's not going to happen. Your nervous system has not been trained to feel peace with food of all things, and certainly not if you're not even feeling that in the rest of your day. We have to start training our muscle memory, our subconscious, our internal world to actually feel that peace. Now, if you've ever worked with me before, and if you want to work with me in the future, you will see. But my approach with my clients is I like for us to choose the path of least resistance. Why is that? So, when it comes to rebuilding your relationship with food and building it this time the way that you actually want it to be, we don't want to think short term in terms of like, I need to do this challenge for 30 days, or I need to stick with this rule all week. Instead, we want to think longer term. We want to think bigger, start thinking in decades, start thinking in lifetimes rather than just the next week or the next month. We really want to ensure that we're doing this in a way that's sustainable, that your mind doesn't feel averted to, that it doesn't feel overly resistant to, because then we can build strategically as we go, as your comfort zone expands, as your mind starts to change, as your body starts to actually relax and release a lot of the old things that it's holding. So that's why I say to choose the path of least resistance, we want to give you a good little stretch of your comfort zone, but we don't want to fling you so far outside your comfort zone that you're just like, oh my gosh, I need comfort. And of course, we know what the comfort is, right? So for an exercise like this, I don't want you to only practice this with food, which is your most triggering thing. It's a loaded subject, right? So with the example of peace, start to think about, how do I bring more peace into every area of my life? How do I start to bring more peace in just how I move throughout my day? How do I bring more peace into the person who I'm now becoming? So one of my teachers, Swami Satchidananda, great self-realized master, he always said that what you do isn't as important as how you do it. So, for example, he says, when you work, work peacefully. And if we start to apply that to all these different areas of our lives, we can then start to see how to integrate this better into the areas of your life where you don't naturally have very much resistance. So, for example, if you're washing the dishes and you look down and you notice, oh my God, I'm washing the dishes like my head's on fire. In that moment, you can give yourself permission to relax and to wash the dishes more peacefully. If you're folding the laundry, fold the laundry more peacefully. If you're speaking to your partner, how can you speak to your partner more peacefully? So as you start training your mind to think, how can I do this more peacefully? That starts to trickle over, because now it just becomes the way that you think. So the way you do one thing becomes the way that you do everything. So then when you sit down to eat, without putting all this pressure on yourself, you can just pose the question, just like you have been. How can I eat this more peacefully? So it might be with less stimulation on the outside. It might mean slowing down. It might mean taking a few slow, deep breaths to calm your system. So look at how you can start to bring peace into all these different areas. So that's just a few examples with peace. Now let's take another few of those North Star words and play around with how you can start to integrate throughout this next upcoming week. So let's take the word freedom, for example. That's another popular one. And this freedom is actually my number one life North Star. Every decision that I make goes through the lens of freedom. And there have been many times in my life where I've lost sight of this and needed to come back to my North Star. So I'll give you an example. And this is a little bit of behind the scenes in just the last 8 years of me running this as a business. So, when I first started this business, my intentions was to create freedom for the people who came to work with me. I wanted them to feel more freedom within themselves, more trust within themselves, and freedom with food. And for myself, I also wanted to create more time freedom and financial freedom because those were things that were feeling very scarce to me at that time. So I made some significant investments to work with certain mentors who could help me learn how to build a business. And I ended up following their formulas and doing what they told me to do strategically in order to build this from nothing. And at that time, I really had no know how of my own. I had never started an online business before. It was completely new to me. And even though I knew the subject matter that I was teaching in, none of that mattered if I didn't have clients. So I needed mentors to help me. Now, even though I still love and respect these mentors, what I realized a few years in, after having my head down and just doing the work, I looked up and I realized I lost that North Star of freedom, and it was manifesting in different ways throughout my business. Like, for example, a lot of the mindset that they were promoting was scale, 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 scale your business, more clients, bigger, bigger, bigger. And I got to the point where it was probably just under 30 people at a time, and I was really feeling constriction on my North Star of freedom because while I really loved my clients, it was just too much because of the depth that I work with each person. It was consuming all day, every day, and I was working 16 hours a day. And after I had done that for a certain period of time, I was feeling myself becoming more and more depleted. So I scaled down and worked with fewer people, but then I didn't have the same financial freedom that I had before. So, what I've been thinking more recently actually is how can I still keep a more small, intimate group of clients so that way I really feel like I can give my all to each person, but then reach my financial goals potentially in other ways, which before I didn't see that. I saw it as all or nothing. Either the business is big and I have no time but more money, or the business is small and I have more time but less money. So, through that lens of freedom, how can I still be as giving as I want to be to my clients and still be of service in another way that doesn't require the same amount of time or emotional intensity, but still allows me to earn an income outside of this? So, notice how in that example, even though I got lost for a little bit, I still came back and I still keep coming back to freedom as that North Star. And I'm making decisions through that lens of freedom. You see how that's the guiding principle. It's how I think, right? It's not just about, is this the right decision or is this the wrong decision? Is this good or is this bad? It's, does this bring me more freedom or does this take away freedom? You see what I mean? So let me now give you another example. This time we'll connect it to food and let's choose a different word. So let's choose the word abundance this time. So for those of you who have been listening to the podcast a while, you know there's tons of episodes on this. So I'm not going to go super deep into it now. But think about abundance in the sense of when you feel like you have true abundance, there's a lot of gratitude there because you're focused on what you have instead of what you don't have. So for food, a lot of us have been living in chronic scarcity. And this can look like, just for a simple example, ooh, I'm starting my diet tomorrow, so I'm not going to be able to eat chocolate. So I need to eat as much chocolate as I can today since tomorrow I can't have it. Or if you've said something to yourself like, tomorrow I'm resolving to not binge anymore, right? Tonight is going to be a huge binge. Why? Because it's the very last one. I'm using air quotes for that, the last one. We know it's never the last one. So this is the idea. When we're in scarcity and we feel like this is my only chance, there's a level of urgency there. And when we feel urgency, we tend to want to hoard, right? Because we have to get it all in now while we can. Whereas with the mindset of abundance, it's very relaxed. Oh, I could have this anytime. This isn't going anywhere. I have everything that I want, right? So there's no rush. There's no urgency. So with food, it's the same thing. But like I said earlier, when you're cultivating your North Star, we don't want to just zoom in on food. We want to work on bringing this energy into every area of your life, into how you think, into the person who you're becoming. So I'll give you an abundance example. So when Shahar, my ex-husband, and I, we moved to St. Petersburg, Florida. And when we moved, we did not have a lot of money at all. I I had just been living in ashrams for years where year after year, I was working a lot. I was working 7 days a week for like 7, 8 hours a day, but it was all service, it was all volunteer. So even though I wouldn't trade that for the world, it did not leave me with a lot of money when it came time for us to get married and to move into our first apartment together. And at the same time, Shahar was a new immigrant. So he wasn't even allowed to work yet because he didn't have his green card. So I felt like all of this pressure on my shoulders to earn money, to take care of the finances, and to show Shahar that he made the right move in coming to the United States for the very first time. So I felt this energy of scarcity and worry around money, even to the point where there was this market where we used to shop at where they had all this different produce and they sold eggplants for just $1. And so we started measuring things and how many eggplants it would cost. But if I saw something like a papaya that was maybe $3.50, and we'd think, oh, well, maybe we could get the papaya, I would say, no, 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 because we could get 3.5 eggplants for that. So everything was measured in terms of how many eggplants it was. But over time, I realized that that scarcity mentality around money wasn't going to be helpful in expanding me into abundance because I was always saying things like, oh, we can't afford it. We can't afford this. We can't afford that. But that was only putting me deeper into that mindset of scarcity, which I knew I didn't want. I knew I wanted to build a mindset of abundance, but it felt hard without having a lot of money. So I started changing my internal world. And instead of saying, I can't afford that, and I still never say, I can't afford that, I would take myself through a couple different steps. First, I would ask if I wanted something, I would say, well, do I really want this? Right? Because sometimes we might want something on a whim, but then when we think about it, it's actually not that important. So I would first use discernment and I would ask myself that. But then if I felt like it really was something that was important to me, instead of saying, I can't afford that, I would ask myself the question, how can I afford that? And asking that question then opened my mind up to potential opportunities. Well, maybe I could get this side gig for a few months. Or I taught myself about investing and I started reading books and watching videos and hiring people to help teach me what I needed to know to set myself up for future success. So I started making different decisions than I would if I was just shutting myself down and saying, oh, I can't afford that. Like I won't even say those words anymore. Even if something is out of my price range, I won't say I can't afford it. I'll either say, it's just not the priority for right now. Or I'll ask myself the question, well, how can I afford it and how can I work towards that? So notice how it's the lens, right? This principle, your North Star, it's not about a right or wrong answer. It's not about good, bad, yes, no. It's a principle that now guides your thinking. It's guiding the person who you are becoming. It's guiding how you're talking to yourself. The questions you're asking yourself becomes your North Star guiding principle that you're not only applying to food, you're applying it to everything. So think of your other North Stars, right? Joy, nourishment. You're not just thinking, how do I bring this more into my eating? You're thinking, how do I bring this more into my life? How do I bring this more into who I am? So with joy, it's not that we're just miserable all day and then we try to bring joy into food. It's throughout your day. How do I bring more joy into this moment? How can I bring more joy into my life? How can I bring more joy into my outlook? And then by the time you get to food, it's not the first time that you've practiced this. And because food for a lot of us carries a lot more of that baggage, it's important that we have the practice not only with food. We're helping our minds think and latch onto these principles, not just in the most difficult of situations. We also want to practice it in easier situations outside of food. And that's going to help to train your mind also purely through the repetition. The more times you bring this into your consciousness throughout your day, throughout your week, the more you're going to see your life aligned with this North Star principle. And I promise you, there are no negative side effects of that, because what you're now doing is you're following that principle where your attention goes, your energy flows. So if your attention is on how do I bring more joy into this? How do I do this more peacefully? Or how would this look if I made this decision from a place of abundance? Now look at how you're guiding your mind. You're guiding your mind toward what you actually want, and you're practicing building it in real time. And that's how we start to change. So, this is my challenge for you now. Pick your North Star word. And throughout your week, not just food. In fact, I would say focus more on the other areas first. Focus on how do I bring this more and more into my world, into who I am, into how I operate, into how I interact with others. So it actually becomes my way of being, because the way we do one thing is often the way we do everything. So, my invitation to you is write down your North Star word somewhere where you'll see it, somewhere where you'll remember it throughout your day. You can even put post it notes in multiple spots just to remind yourself, oh, yeah, this is what I'm focusing on, to help your mind keep coming back to the North Star. And then practice throughout the week and see what happens. So, there's one more thing that I would love to just ask you before we go. And this is actually a big favor. And it really is just if you want to help me. So I've been recording episodes on this podcast for a number of years now. And if you've been a listener and if you've been receiving value from it, it would be so incredibly meaningful for me if you would rate the podcast 5 stars if you're on Spotify, or write a nice review on Apple if you listen on Apple. It helps me more than you realize. And I know that I can just seem like a person who's out there on the internet, but I'm real. And this is one of the things that really, really helps. So if you were willing to just take your next 30 seconds to a minute to rate the podcast 5 stars or write a nice review, I would just be so immensely grateful for that. And I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of days. Bye.